Welcome back to Wheat State Wool. I am Sarah. Today's tutorial is about the puff stitch, sometimes called the bean stitch. But before we get started, please hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the little bell to be notified every time I upload a new video. And let's get into it. So as I mentioned before in the intro, this is all about the puff stitch, or sometimes known as the bean stitch. There's a small one and then like a little bit bigger one. They're both work the same exact way. You just do the step that's required to make it a couple more times for the larger one. In order to work this stitch, it depends on how you're doing it. If you're just like starting with the puff for your row, and just ending with a puff or whatever, you would need an odd number of chains, or stitches for your first row. But if you're going to do like a double crochet on each end, or half double on each end, whichever stitch you're doing on each end, you need an even number. So I have 11. I'm going to foundation DC myself one more here. So now I have 12. And I'm going to chain 2 and turn, and I'm going to skip over this first one, and in this next stitch I'm going to work my puff. So to do that, I got to yarn over, insert in the stitch and pull up a loop and hold it, and I'm going to do that 2 more times for a total of 7 loops. So yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull up a loop. So now I have 7 loops. I'm going to yarn over and pull through all, and then chain 1 to secure it. So the chain 1 will have to count as a stitch, or you'll end up with a very wavy, funky row. So because that counts, we're skipping this next one, and then we're going to work another puff into the next stitch. So yarn over, pull up a loop 3 times, 2 and 3. I have 7 loops. I'm going to yarn over and pull through all 7, hopefully without pulling up a strand. There we go. Chain 1 to secure. Skip the next stitch and start your puff in the next one. So yarn over and pull up a loop 3 times, 2, 3, 7 loops, yarn over, pull through all 7, chain 1 to secure, skip the next one, work into the next yarn over and pull up a loop 3 times, 2 and 3, 7 loops, yarn over, pull through all 7 and chain 1. Skip the next stitch and make your puff into the next one. All right, we're skipping the next stitch, and then we're going to put a double crochet on top of this turning chain. So I started with a double or chain 2, and I ended with a double. So in order to start and end that way, you need an even number of stitches. If you start with a puff and end with a double, I can't talk, you need an odd number of stitches. All right, so I'm going to chain 2 and turn, and now we're going to work our puff stitches into the spaces between. But before we get started with that, I want to show you something. I have to turn this back over to do so. When we worked our stitch and then we chained 1, this little guy here is the chain 1. This thing here behind the puff is the top of the puff stitch. If you pay attention, I'm going to frog back to show you. Boop. All right. So I pulled out the chain 1 to show you. Now look, this right here is the top, and it's coming out to the right or behind the puff. And when we chain, it kind of comes out on top, or even slightly to the left of the stitch. And this is the reverse if you're left-handed, of course. And then we skipped that next chain rather, or stitch, and then we would double crochet into the last one. So we have effectively a chain space right here. So when we chain 2 and turn, we're going to actually work a puff here in the chain space. So we're going to yarn over and work our puff stitch. You get 7 loops, yarn over, pull through all 7 and chain 1, skip over the puff and work into the next chain space. Make your next puff stitch. Chain 1 to secure, and so on. In every chain space, you're going to work your puff stitch. It is a little bit of a yarn eater. It's not too awful bad though. Okay. And this is technically the last chain space, because you didn't start out with a double crochet chain 1, you went right into working your puff. So now we're going to skip over that puff and put a double crochet knot here. This is the part of the puff stitch, but in the chain next to it. Looking pretty cool, huh? So now we're going to chain 2 and turn, and you can do the same thing again. Now let's say you need to work a row of double crochet stitches over top of that. We're making a finisher here. So if the chain stitch counted, then this would be empty. But we do need to put one in the chain space. So I'm going to double crochet in the chain space. And then on top, which looks like it's a chain space, but really I'm going into that stitch. And then in the chain space right next to it, it's kind of crowded. You could also, if you didn't want to have to try and find that, put 2 double crochet in each chain space, and that would count for the same. Not only is it easier, but it's faster. And it looks the same. So why make it more difficult, right? This is the last chain space before the double crochet. At the end, remember, we don't chain 1 before doing a puff. So now we're just going to put our double crochet on the last chain 2. Whoop. I didn't have enough yarn. Alright. And that effectively creates the double crochet row above. And then you would just do what you did with this one to start over again if you wanted to keep going in that pattern. That's how you work the puff. Now that's the small puff where you have 7 loops. Let's work a bigger puff. So we'll chain 2 and turn. This counts. We'll put it right here. So you're going to yarn over and pull up a loop 5 times. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, any more yarn, and 5. Now you have too many. You have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, and pull through all and chain 1, skip 1, and we'll do that 5 times again. 2, 3, 4, and I need more yarn. There we go. 5. So you can see it's fatter. I personally like the 7 loop one, but that's just me. So skip and then do, whoops, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Chain 1. It's much closer. So it'll be a lot tighter work when you're working back in over top. And you work it the same way. Into the chain space, you'll put the next puff. Chain 1, skip over that puff, and then work into the next chain space. And then when you work, you come back around to the end, you're not going to put one here because there is no chain space there. You're just going to work into the top of the chain 2. But remember here, we started out with a stitch right into this chain space because we do end with a chain 1 before we work our last double crochet. I hope that makes sense. So that is the puff stitch, both the smaller and the larger one. The smaller one looks taller. I could make this one look taller too, but I don't really feel the need to. I hope this helps you, and I would greatly appreciate it if you would hit the subscribe button and like this video. Leave a comment if you'd like to, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.